Hey there, I'm Mike Kingston, the writer and creator of Headlock Comics, and you are watching Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We're joined today by a very talented writer and comic creator. He is, of course, the creator behind the amazing comic Headlocked. I met him back in 2010 at C2E2, way back when I was first starting interviewing as well, too. We're joined today by Mike Kingston. How are you doing today, Mike?
Good. It's the middle of a run in the middle of a Kickstarter, so it's not a lot of sleep, a lot of stress, but it's kind of how we run all the time.
Well, you kind of have to when it comes to Kickstarter. That is like literally a second job.
Sure.
A second stage of life as well, too. For those that don't know anything about Headlocked and about yourself as a creative individual, tell us what Headlock is all about.
Years ago, I've been a wrestling fan since I was 8 years old, comic book fan as well. And over in the early part of my life, I would buy every wrestling comic that ever came out. And to me, they were just not great. Over a period of time, it became apparent to me that nobody was going to make the wrestling comics that I wanted to read as a wrestling fan. So I made it myself, created a pitch and a business plan and everything. And I went to every publisher in comics and they all just kind of laughed me out of the room. Literally a dude straight laughed in my face from a pretty sizable publisher, front of the catalog. I always knew, like, everybody I knew that liked wrestling, like comics, and everybody that I knew like comics, like wrestling. So I knew there was an audience for it. So I don't know, I'm stubborn. So I decided to make the book myself. And it's called Headlocked, and it's the story of a kid, Mike Hartman, who is a theater major in college, who sort of unexpectedly falls in love with wrestling, quits school, and it's sort of his journey through the wrestling business, trying to learn the craft of wrestling, navigate the underbelly of the business. So we sort of examine the craft of wrestling through the eyes of a performance artist, but at the same time, it's, the girl gets off the bus in Hollywood kind of stories. That's where we started. I started selling it out of my backpack at wrestling shows, on message boards and stuff, which, could give you an idea of how long we've been doing this. We found a little niche, people who like wrestling and comics. And, the thing you learn, I guess, is that some people think that they're wrestling fans, but they're really just WWE fans, or they're, now AEW fans or whatever. They're not wrestling fans. They just want their one thing in their one little slice of the world. I found a nice little niche with people who liked wrestling. ROH fans tended to be my sweet spot early on because they were people who liked wrestling that were open to alternative wrestling products. I put it out. I worked 2 jobs for almost a year to pay for a print run, some convention tables, and some, the art and stuff for my first book. And I just started taking it around to shows. The kind of unexpected thing that happened for me is that a lot of wrestlers discovered my book. Wrestlers who like comics that were at Comic-Cons as fans discovered my book and really liked it. One of the highest bits of praise that I would get would be from guys that are like, oh, you never trained or you never worked in the business or whatever. And that was always really neat to me. This is like the highest compliment I could get. Eventually, I contacted Jerry the King Lawler, and he agreed to do cover art for me because I knew he was an artist. He knocks it out of the park. So he's done all the covers for our trades. When Kickstarter became a thing, that was really what kind of kicked us into high gear, was sort of my ability to bypass the direct market and just take it directly to the people. We've had a lot of success with Kickstarter. The one that we're running now is our 6th, and that's enabled me to make the books that I wanted to make with my friends and with people who I admire and whatnot. We've launched a second title, Tales from the Road, which is the book that we're kickstarting now. It's exceeded my wildest dreams. You know what I mean? Like, I just wanted to make a cool wrestling comic, and now, like, there are wrestlers who I grew up watching who are like my best friends, and I've been able to collaborate with some of the biggest names in the business, and it's just I've been lucky.
Well, persistence as well too. The fact that you've continuously created a great product with amazing, talented individuals, and I love wrestling, plain and simple. Like I grew up in the 80s, 90s era, 80s mainly, but the talent that all of these individuals have, both male and female performers, is just incredible from not only from a show perspective, but also from an entertainment perspective as well, too. Looking kind of behind the scenes of wrestling as you have now, as you're telling these stories and as you're collaborating with these amazing wrestlers, what was one thing that you learned that is really misunderstood about the wrestling industry?
I think in a lot of ways it's weird. I mean, I think that there's this sort of, I don't know, image of wrestling as this like, greasy, dirty business or whatever, and it's really not. I've had my foot in wrestling and I've had my foot in comics, and I've had so much more, I've been treated so much more well by wrestling people than I have by comic book people, which I find, I don't know, wouldn't I don't think be your expectation, just coming to it blindly. Almost everybody I've met in wrestling has been a total sweetheart, super supportive, super nice. Even after 10 years and having almost 40 wrestlers contribute to my book, I still struggle with getting any kind of sort of traction in the comic book world. Like I barely exist in comics, which honestly, I don't care because I don't need it. You know what I mean? I don't need them because I'm obviously making books, but it would be nice if this was a little easier. Cause I have a million ideas. There's a million things I want to do. I'm currently, I making 2 titles and I'd like to add 2 more, ongoing titles. It would be nice if I didn't have to sort of shut down for 30 days and beat the drum and, work a full-time job to make sure that I can do the things that I do. We just keep plugging away. I figure if I'm going to kill myself, I want to make the stuff that I want to make. And I feel like we've been able to do that. And I feel like there's at least an audience for that. So enough of an audience for us to keep making them.
6 Kickstarters is nothing to sneeze at, quite literally. I mean, you have been consistent. You've created a great product. From what I've read, especially about Tales from the Road Volume 2, you have amazing artists, you have a great writing style. That the wrestlers that have contributed to these stories is just, it's incredible to see the talent that you have for this. And I'm shocked that you aren't getting more traction, truly. Like, this is an incredibly well-produced product.
I mean, it's tricky because it's the one thing I have learned about comics is that, so much talk is around the direct market, and it's such a small sliver of what comics is. I mean, obviously, comics is words and pictures put together. I mean, it doesn't matter how you read it, whether you read it on a tablet, whether you read it on whatever, on a roll of toilet paper. I mean, comics are comics, and there's so many people that sort of want to narrowly define what comics is. And that's such a small sliver of the business. I mean, obviously, Marvel and DC would kill themselves to have Scholastic's numbers or, or webtoons or whatever, you know what I mean? Like those are the things that people are reading comics on, in terms of sheer numbers. But, we talk about Batman constantly, and that's not that it's not a great selling book or whatever. It's not an interesting character or any of that. It's just, it's very hard to get people to talk about anything other than Marvel and DC superheroes. It's tough.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I mean, I started interviewing webcomic creators way back when the show started in 2008. So, they've been constantly downplayed by the main comic book industry for decades.
Oh, absolutely. And it's, you know what I mean? Like, the thing that I love, the thing that I'm probably most proud of about anything is I've brought so many people to comics. So many people who've never read a comic book before. Headlocked was their first book, and I feel like that I'm proud of. If you read your first book, it's generally because of a character. You know what I mean? Like, no one's like, oh, I heard, Brian Michael Bendis is writing Spider-Man. You know what I mean? Like, that's not your first book. I mean, that's your, 10th book or whatever, but it's not what brings you to the party. Like, Spider-Man. And, I'm bringing people to comics because of Headlocked. That makes me smile. Like, I'll see people at shows be like, yo, I never would have read a comic if it wasn't for your book. And now I'm like super into into it. And, I've got a giant pull list, and thanks for making me go broke. That's the thing that I'm most proud of, more than anything Else.
Let's talk about some of the themes for Tales from the Road. What What were some of the themes that drew you as a writer to create more of these stories?
I love, obviously, wrestling, and I have so much respect for wrestlers as creators and as artists. And so many wrestlers love comics. I was like, well, what if we made comics together? Like, how cool would that be? And that's how it all started. Just a simple desire, like, for me to make comics with, the initial ones were Hurricane, Rob Van Dam, and Christopher Daniels. And I thought that would be so cool to be able to make comics with them. And that was it. And so we started telling stories. From there, it's just, I would do conventions with people. Every once in a while, you hit an idea, whether it's like something that's happened to somebody in their career or an outside interest that they have, or sometimes it's just something totally out of just a random idea. We did a story in volume 1 of Tales from the Road with Gangrel about a guy that trains Bigfoot to wrestle. You know what I mean? Like, that just came from nowhere. So that part has been fun. It's been fun to be able to sit down with people who I respect as artists and as creators and create something totally new. That's just super gratifying, at the end of the day. We try to find, the right common ground and the right story. And I try not to force it. Sometimes there's not a story there. There's people that I know want to do stories and, and neither one of us could find the right story. And so it doesn't happen, and maybe it'll happen one day when the right story idea hits us. I do take it very seriously, and it's not just name dropping and putting famous people out there for the sake of putting famous people out there. You know what I mean? It's got to be the right story. It's got to be it's just got to be right for the book.
I saw something in the past of some of your past interviews where you learned how to tell a story over nachos. How did that come about?
I was in San Diego one year. It was a wild year. I had happened to be at Fred's, which is no longer, it used to be like a post San Diego staple that's no longer there anymore. I was there it was Christopher Daniels and Hurricane and Paul Heyman and myself. It was funny. Like, some dude came over and asked him if he could take a picture with Paul Heyman. Paul Heyman made him like take a picture with the nacho chip. And I don't know, that always amused me. Like, and he did it. I had told a joke, or not a joke. It was a story that I had heard, and I sort of got it backwards. Like, I wasn't thinking of it structurally. And then like the payoff came second, and then I kept going, and they're like, oh, you need to stop right there. Like, that was the payoff. And they're like, hey, you're right. So, I was just starting out then. So I definitely was a little more, I want to say, intimidated, starstruck, nervous, whatever. I mean, by then I had known Shane and Chris for a little while, but it was my first time around Paul Heyman. So, who is as charismatic as you'd expect him to be. Like, and I don't even mean it in a negative way, but like, the man has a very seductive personality, and it was just impressive. You know what I mean? Like, the first time I had met him was Samoa Joe had introduced me to him, and he was just, oh, the pleasure's all mine. And just like lifelong wrestling nerds, like, oh man, Paul Heyman. It's interesting. I mean, so many of the guys are so different than you'd expect them to be, and so many guys are exactly the same.
That's great. Yeah, I saw that quote. I was just like, I have to ask that. That sounded hilarious. Looking at this book, at least for this Kickstarter campaign, and I know you've written a lot of these stories and you've worked with these talented people. What was the hardest scene for you to write in this particular book?
What was the hardest scene? A lot of these stories came pretty easy, honestly. And that's the thing about it. Like, so many of these guys are so effortless. Morrison's story is actually adapted from a real life thing that happened to him. That we adapted to a character in the main Headlock series. Pentagon's was good. I mean, honestly, a lot of these came so easy. I don't even know, like, and that's the thing about it. So many of these, like the story I did with, for the previous volume with Shane Helms, I mean, we literally conceived it in like 10 minutes, and I had the entire, it was 6 pages, and I had the script written in like, 20, and then back to him. And then we went over it, and it's one of my favorite stories. Some of them are real easy. I mean, I don't think any of these particular stories were that hard to conceive. It's always tricky when you're walking a line a little bit, when you're dealing with Effie story that we did has some powerful themes, as does Thunder Rosa's story. It's tricky when you're dealing with some heavier topics. I think for the most part, these all kind of came together pretty easy. Rob Van Dam's story, which is his second story now. He had a story in volume 1, is one of my favorite stories in the book. And that's a story that we had originally conceived one way, and then we took it a different way. I'll tell you, it's sort of inspired by Reefer Madness. We had conceived it one way, and then we took it a different way, and that made it so much more fun. And I'm really excited for people to read that one because it's super fun.
So what was the story title for that comic?
It's called The Highway to Hell. It's a lot of fun. Inspired by Reefer Madness, and you definitely it's in that sort of tone, that sort of 60s propaganda style tone. And it's good. Recently I've got stories lined up for 7 of the next 8 months. So we've got a lot of really cool stuff coming, even beyond this Kickstarter. So it's literally my favorite thing to do.
When you first started writing this series compared to now, out of all the people you've worked with, who is the best storyteller and who is the hardest storyteller to work with? Not because of personalities or anything like that, but who can tell a story, who can't?
I mean, everybody can tell a story. I mean, that's the thing that makes it so easy, is these guys tell stories in the ring, even if they don't think of themselves as storytellers, they're totally storytellers. And I think there's been more of an appreciation over the years for the stories that they tell. But you know what I mean? Like, that's what makes it so easy, is that, they're telling stories in the ring, and then between shows, they're telling stories in the car. And I mean, they're all such natural storytellers. And I think to a certain extent, it's almost a defense mechanism for some of them, because, you know what I mean? Like, I think when you're famous, you keep people at arm's length, and you know what I mean? You develop the ability to sort of tell these interesting stories as a way to give people a good interaction without giving them anything personal or real. You know what I mean? Like, intimate. Everybody's so good at it. The hardest thing sometimes is just, you know what I mean, the stories, adapting the stories into the space that we have. So one of the stories in the book we did with Crime Time, and it's literally, I mean, it's the last thing that Shad did before he passed. He was a really good friend of mine, and that really hit me hard. But he gave me the edits for that story 3 days before he passed. The initial draft that they put together for that was, I mean, it was probably a 20-page story, and we had 12 pages of real estate. So we had to figure out a way to, get that story where we needed to be. Mick Foley did that when we did a Christmas story with Mick Foley. Same type of thing. Like, that can be the hardest thing, is the guys don't understand the real estate in a comic book page and what you can tell effectively and what you can't.
It sounds like you said you have about 7 or 8 months worth of stories available.
By the time June hits, I'll have enough content for Tales from the Road Volume 4, and this is Volume 2. So I've been really, really lucky. We publish a lot of the stories in Pro Wrestling Crate, and that gets a lot of the content financed. So we collect a chunk of stories for the trade, and then we do new stories. So this particular book has the Rob Van Dam story has never been seen. The Effie story has never been seen. The Danhausen story has never been seen. And the Danny Limelight story has never been seen. Some people don't subscribe to the crate. Some people didn't back for the bonus Kickstarter content. So it's just a matter of getting these stories, which I'm so super proud of, in front of more people. I'm working on a story this month with the Iconics, which will be the longest. Well, they're the inspiration now, actually, but it'll be the longest Tales from the Road story we've ever done. It's a super personal thing about their sort of journey through WWE with, struggling with their body image. And it's sort of filtered through A Nightmare on Elm Street. It's a really fun way to sort of tackle a very serious topic. And they love it. I mean, they've been great to collaborate with. And, this is another type of a story. We had conceived it one way, and then one of them had pitched a different idea for the villain, and then it just pushed it into a whole different direction. It became the right story, so that was great. We're doing a Christmas story with a very unexpected talent. in December with a celebrity tie-in on top of it. I can't really announce that yet, but
Darn.
it's going to be really cool. And then I've got I'm doing a silent story with Jerry Lawler that's like an ode to the wrestling journeyman. That'll be in February. And then I have 4 slots lined up after that. I've got some pretty big names lined up for it, but we don't have that. We're not too far into the production stage on any of those yet.
Looking back at all the wrestlers that you've worked with, who is the most underrated wrestler in the business?
I mean, a year ago, I would have probably told you Thunder Rosa, but she's definitely gotten her props this year. Underrated. Let me think. I mean, I think right now, of the talents I've worked with, I feel like, he gets his props on an indie level, but I think Effie is a genius. I think the way he constantly reinvents himself, the way he presents himself, the way he sort of, I mean, I can't even imagine that he's probably a lot of people's sort of, like real first sort of interaction with a sort of a positive gay character in wrestling, with a positive out gay character. The same with, with Matt Cardona. I mean, there's a guy who's done so much with so little. I mean, they don't give that guy anything. You know what I mean? Like he basically built the WWE's YouTube business. He got himself over with the Long Island Hollywood story. And he's reinvented himself a bunch of times. And now, like, we did a story for this called Fig Story, which is essentially Toy Story with wrestling figures. And I love it. And I think we're going to do more of it. But you know what I mean? He's reinvented himself. I mean, he just did this whole deathmatch run with GCW, which was insane. And you know what I mean? He gets people excited about whatever he's doing. It's really impressive. I mean, I think the way he could have gone into GCW and sort of big leagued him and like, I was in WWE or whatever. And I mean, the person that he plays is so pitch perfect for that company. I got a ton of respect for him as a creator and for an idea man and for a hustler. Probably those two guys, I think, are guys right now that probably haven't gotten all the credit that they should have. Christopher Daniels is another one. We've done a story together, and he's a good friend of mine. And I mean, a good chunk of the modern indie scene is sort of owed to guys like that. And I just don't know if he'll ever get the full credit for all the things he's done to nurture that generation along the Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, Bryan Danielson era or whatever. I mean, he was sort of there before that, and he's still performing at a high level. I'd say one of the more underutilized talents at Impact. And I understand he's in the office too, but at the beginning, they really could have used people who could carry, like a lot of the guys can wrestle, obviously, but carrying a TV program is a whole different animal. And I do think that he and Frankie are probably better at that than a good chunk of the teams that they had to start out. So I do think they probably could have done more with them, but I also understand you want to develop the next generation. So I get that too.
It's amazing to see how we perceive these amazing, talented people, these wrestlers as, celebrities and as, icons of our varying generations. See, I didn't know that Lawler was an artist, things like subtle things like that of being creative in the ring. Who else is creative that you've worked with that is just like you didn't realize they had this talent?
The cool thing, I guess, is when you write a wrestling comic book, a lot of wrestlers that have art skills will come tell you about them. Tugboat did a piece of art for The Hard Way, and Booker T did a piece of art for The Last Territory Part 2. Tony Atlas. I love that Tony Atlas does art in pointillism. Like he's this enormous man hunched over a drawing table working with little dots. Like that stuff to me is fascinating. And I mean, and I guess I didn't mention it before, and it's hard to think of him this way, but when you want to talk about underrated, I mean, Jerry Lawler to me is probably the most underrated wrestler of all time. 99% of what we consider modern sports entertainment was birthed in Memphis. I mean, he was the first guy to use celebrity tie-ins with the Andy Kaufman thing. I mean, most of ECW was sort of ripped from Memphis. The Shawn Michaels Playgirl pose, with the belt over his junk. I mean, Jerry did that with his crown back in the 80s. He had Adam West on his show as Batman. They wrestled monsters, as a precursor to, characters like The Undertaker and Kane. So much of what we consider modern sports entertainment was conceived in Memphis, in the same way that so much of what we look at from the modern women's wrestling style was conceived in Shimmer. But you don't necessarily, you know what I mean? Like WWE obviously slants things into their favor, but you know what I mean? Like Jerry to me is probably, I mean, aside from everything he accomplished as a talent, like creatively, I think he's one of the most influential guys in the business.
This pandemic obviously is a unfortunate situation that's happening all throughout the world. Did this help you from a creative perspective, or did it hurt your creativity? It
hurt. Just because for me, like a good chunk of my business model is shows and going out and bringing my stuff directly to people. It's how I make build relationships with wrestlers that I don't know. It's how I build, that's how I bring my work to people. And then I had I had two real high profile projects. They lost their investment, and another was a movie tie-in that got wrecked because it was, the pandemic and theatrical releases and whatnot. And that both of those could have been huge for me in terms of being able to sort of cross over into, doing this exclusively. Because that's the thing that's hard for me. Aside from doing what I do with comics and wrestling, one of the other things that I take very seriously is my convention presence. And when I started doing conventions, there was no wrestling at conventions. There were some, maybe you get Virgil or Greg Valentine or whatever doing autographs, but like, they'd kind of just be wherever. And, there wasn't wrestling art. There wasn't it's like it didn't exist. And it always kind of bothered me just because I was a wrestling fan and you see all these different fandoms represented and you're like, well, why not mine? So, and as I come to find out, there's a ton of shows that had bans against wrestling. Like they didn't want wrestling at the show. So I mean, we were probably the first wrestling thing at over a dozen shows. So I would, approach the promoter and be like, well, I'd like to come to your show. I'd like to, have a space. And I read a wrestling comic book and they're like, oh, that's okay. You have a comic book. I'm like, all right, well, I'd like to bring Jerry Lawler. They're like, well, we don't allow wrestlers. And I'm like, well, Jerry's my artist. And like, okay, you can bring Jerry as an artist. And so we would bring him and they wouldn't even announce him as like a celebrity. They'd announce him as an artist in Artist Alley. And then we'd show up and blow the doors off the place. And now they book wrestling. I have the only dedicated wrestling booth at San Diego Comic-Con. Up until this year, I had the only dedicated wrestling booth at New York Comic-Con, at Emerald City Comic-Con. And those booths aren't cheap, but it's important for me. I feel like it's important to me to make sure that wrestling is represented at cons, that there's a place for fans to go to feel welcome, respected, whatever. We make cool stuff. We make cool art prints and merch and stuff like that for the shows, exclusives. And, we try to give people a chance to meet some of their favorite wrestlers, to have a good fan experience, not just the cattle sign deal. I mean, I've had lots of famous wrestlers, but I've also turned some down because like some people want too much money and I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to have the 30-second photo op. Like I want people to be able to come and have an interaction that doesn't feel rushed. I mean, sometimes obviously some people take it too far, but for the most part, people want to come, they want to meet their person and be able to be like, oh, you were my childhood, or, I really respect what you do, without having a hand on their back, shoving them through the line. So, I try to provide that at shows, but that's not an inexpensive thing. You know what I mean? Like, I just did New York Comic-Con this year, and I mean, my New York Comic-Con booth is, $7,000, which for a guy that, writes an independent comic book is not cheap. And I'm, whatever. I make it back. I don't lose money on the shows. I don't make a ton of money, but I don't lose a ton of money. And that's kind of, unfortunately for me, that's kind of my business sense, I guess. You know what I mean? I'd rather be creatively fulfilled than, rich. But, we had Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler and Jake Roberts and Rob Van Dam, and we had the Major Figures podcast guys. We made some really neat art prints for the show, some exclusives, and, it was a good time. And people are always really happy for our booth. That makes me happy that we can do that for people. But to do that, obviously, to be liquid enough to have $7,000 kicking around, I work another job, and it would be nice to get to a point where I don't have to do that, because I could make a lot more stuff. I'd rather do what I do the way I do it.
I'm stalking you on social media quite literally, just because of your photos and your presence and everything like that. And I loved your photos at New York Comic Con, because it was just, everyone had a good time, at least from what I could tell. It looked incredible. I mean, the crowds must have been amazing, and it brought joy to, I'm sure, many people.
And that's the thing. That's one of the things that I love, when people send me messages and like, oh, I couldn't come this year. I didn't feel safe or whatever, and totally understandable. But, the thing I'm missing most is your booth, and I appreciate what you do. And that's all I want. You know what I mean? Like, it's just the people to be able to come and be happy. And, for the longest time, wrestling was just a redheaded stepchild, even amongst like nerds. I feel like I've had a part in at least helping wrestling get accepted at more cons and be treated as a viable entertainment thing. I mean, whatever. If I don't exist, it probably still happens. Maybe it doesn't happen as fast, whatever. But you know what I mean? Like, I feel good about my role in what we've been able to do.
Before we get to the introspective questions, though, what type of amazing perks do you have for this particular campaign? Because it ends on November 11th, if I recall correctly.
So we have a lot of cool stuff. The biggest perk that we have left is Mikkel drew a variant cover that's inspired by the Grand Budapest Hotel movie poster, which is basically like a hotel key cabinet with tags, and all the actors are on the tags. So we have that cover with all of our contributors on the tags, and there's 4 empty slots, and you can be drawn in. We'll make you a character in the Headlock universe. We might make you a promoter, a wrestler, whatever, podcaster, whatever, something. And we'll put you on the cover, and then we put a pinup of your character in the back. And we try to find a way to make it something to sort of shed some light on what your character is, like, maybe a magazine article or a sports card or something, just something that, we sort of create this thing that would exist in the Headlock universe to get people to know what you're about. And then, we've gone on to, we've done this since the beginning, and it's one of the things that's really helped fund our books is the people who are drawn into the universe, because they're big tiers. And, but we've had a lot of characters that, we've created for people that were big backers that have gone on to be used in other stories. In this particular story, the Jeff Cobb story, we used a character named Tommy Tuxedo. It was like a sleazy promoter, and he was conceived in an earlier book, but that's it was a fan purchase tier, whatever, the character we created. There's a bunch of them, and like the cool thing is like sometimes other things happen. We did a little expansion pack for Champions of the Galaxy for Headlocked, and some of the characters that were used in that were people that had the draw-in tiers and stuff. So I feel like that's a fun part, and it pushes me a little bit too to sort of find a space for them. And then I do like to try to use them again, just because these are the people that have sort of helped us the most, financially, whatever, but like those are the people that have helped us the most in the biggest way. And then we want to sort of honor that by, making those characters, building those characters into the universe. It feels right. It feels, the best way to reward the people who have helped us the most when we've needed it the most.
What was an early experience where you learned that language had power?
Let me think. That's a wow. I wasn't prepared to go that heavy. One of the things that you learn in wrestling, there's a whole different subculture, and there's different, words mean different things in wrestling, and the way that you say things mean different things. So to sort of be accepted into that world and, you have to sort of be able to understand some of it, you know what I mean? And that's one of the cooler things I think that has happened to me is, I've been allowed to be in locker rooms and stuff, and a lot of wrestlers treat me like, sort of one of the boys. And, I mean, you kind of have to, you speak their language, you can communicate with their jargon and whatever, like, and it's one of the things I think gained me acceptance with them as a creator, when they read my book and they're like, wow, this feels, this feels real to me. So, I mean, I think, sort of being a part of that, existing in that subculture and playing by those rules and whatever, I think, has definitely helped me out.
Then as a writer yourself, though, for many years, what was the first thing you wrote where you realized that I could do this as a career?
I think I don't think there's anybody in comics that doesn't have imposter syndrome. I mean, just judging by my timeline and the people that I know creatively. So, I was very fortunate that, my book was accepted almost immediately. I was originally part of a studio called Visionary Comics, and it was a bunch of people trying to put stuff together and get it out in the world. And they had a message board, and I would post my stuff up there, and like people really responded to it, and that was really cool. And then the first booth I had exhibited in or tabled at was at Wizard Philly, and I sold so many more books than I expected to. And then I did Chicago, and that I sold even more books, and it just kind of gave me, in my heart, I always sort of believed in what we were doing. And it was nice to at least have some of that reaffirmed, because, people around you aren't always the most supportive because it seems like such a crazy deal. You know what I mean? Like if you know anything about comics and you know about the industry and what people make, and, people don't really make a lot of money doing comics, and you're in it for the love of the game, and it's time consuming, and you're wrangling artists, and you're wrangling, for me, I'm wrangling artists and wrestlers and inkers and letters. Like I do everything except produce the art, but I have to, do all of that stuff. So it's, sometimes people are like, this is kind of crazy what you're doing. You know what I mean? Like, when my first book came out, I took a week off from work and I drove to every comic book store in 3 states. And every shop owner I talked to, or every, person at the store that was a representative, all knew of multiple customers that were regular customers that were wrestling fans. And then they would proceed to tell me why they would not be ordering my book. Like that's kind of how the things I had to sort of overcome at the beginning. But then once I did it, once I put it out there for consumption and didn't rely on other people to sort of be that middleman, it's been nothing but success. You know what I mean? I've got my table and I'm like, look at this. And people are like, oh, this is so cool. Which unfortunately you wish you didn't have to do everything yourself, but sometimes you do. And that's the way it started for me. Once I got out in front of people and I saw the response, then you're just like, oh man, all right, we're really doing it, and it's what you had hoped.
What is the wisest piece of advice that someone has ever said to you that stuck with you in your career?
A comic book creator once told me at San Diego Comic-Con that they don't make soap for your soul. And I don't know, it's a weird thing, but it has really it really has kind of stuck with me. I try to do everything the right way, and I try to not step on people. I try to lift people up. I try not to promote it, like I try to be a good person and exist. I don't know. I don't even know why that stuck with me all those years. It was just sort of a weird offhanded thing that somebody said to me once, but it's definitely a thing. And then one of the other ones is as a writer, I guess as any kind of a creator, is you need to know the difference between when it's finished and when it's done. Sometimes you can spend hours. I mean, when I first started out, I remember spending a whole night sort of changing 3 words in a piece of dialogue, just back and forth, and saying it to myself and trying to figure out what the perfect way to do it is. Sometimes it just has to be done. You know what I mean? Like sometimes it's not going to be perfect. Sometimes you got to walk away from it. Like you know what I mean? Like every time you open a script, you could find something to tweak or something to change. And sometimes you just need to know and be like, okay, this is done, and walk away.
Yeah. Nothing's perfect.
No, but it's hard. It's a hard thing to learn. You build things up in your head. You're like, oh, this is going to be the story that breaks me. And you know what I mean? People are going to love this thing and it's going to be great. Especially when you see, like if you look online and you see some of the real nitpicky stuff that people will pull on things. And, it's hard not to be like, I don't want that. And honestly, that's one thing I've been super, super lucky about is like, I have a foot in 2 of the more toxic fandoms on the internet. And somehow I've managed to avoid most of it. I don't know. I mean, I think it's just because a lot of the real fandoms are based on like the heavy brands, like WWE or AEW or Marvel and DC or whatever, like the characters that have 70 years of awareness and existence. So I guess like I've been really, really lucky that I seem to have dodged a lot of that.
It can really affect, your mental state as well as your creativity as well too, if you happen to get targeted.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm friends with a ton of people that take a ton of damage online, and it's some of what the story that I'm working on right now with the inspiration with Jess and Cass have to deal with, because I mean, particularly as women, particularly as women who are sort of sold for their appearance, you know what I mean? Like the constant stream of criticism or just judgment. It doesn't even have to be criticism. It's just judgment that people face online, whether it's positive or negative, can really affect your reality.
We all have to deal with it in our own ways, unfortunately. And at least, with a creative outlet like Headlocked and how you're working with people and telling their stories, and they're telling their own stories, I should say, at least some light can be shed and hopefully can help other people.
And that's all I really want. You know what I mean? I want to make the stuff I want to make with the people I want to make it with, and, do no harm along the way. And if you can help, you can help some people grow or help some people, achieve their dreams. I mean, even better.
Is there anything that I haven't touched upon that you'd like to showcase and share with those that are watching and listening to this interview?
The one thing I always try to tell people, I guess, like everybody in their life has consumed a product that was made for money, that was made to, hack out a few bucks. I mean, that's the way I always felt about like the old WWE or WCW licensed comic books. Like they might not necessarily have been made for wrestling fans. Like it was just, this is hot. We're going to pay for the license and we're going to just, we're going to hack out some money. And I think everybody can feel when something is done for money and something is done for love. And everything that we've done, anything I've ever done, is done out of love, is done out of passion for wrestling and comics. We work with wrestlers who want to do it, who want to be there. I have people at shows that want to be there, that want to talk to fans, they aren't just there for, a payday. I mean, because wrestlers, as much as fan interaction can be difficult, all the wrestlers that I know love to meet people, and to the ones that I guess haven't forgotten where they've come from. And those are the people I love to be around. I love to be around people like Shane Helms is still a fan of everything. And, Lisa Marie Victoria, she's another one that's just so positive, and they love all kinds of stuff, and they never let anything sort of get them down in that regard. And they're super fun to be around. And Jerry's the same way. Like Jerry's, people think of Jerry as like, a generation of people will think of Jerry as the puppies guy. But like, I've been to more art museums with Jerry than anybody. We were just at a show in Stockton, California, Stockton Con. And there was a museum that has the largest collection of J.C. Leyendecker art. J.C. Leyendecker did the post before Rockwell and was Rockwell's mentor. We go and we nerd out over the art and the brushstrokes and, you know, the technical parts of it and stuff. I think I'm going to see Jerry next weekend, and he's coming up for a signing up here, and we'll probably go to the Norman Rockwell Museum. But I mean, I've been to more art museums with Jerry than any other human on earth. And he loves it. I don't know. It's just interesting to me because I think sometimes people wouldn't expect that out of people, but like I always get a kick out of watching how excited he gets at art museums and Comic Cons and stuff like that. You know, that's I guess that's what I want people to understand more than anything else, is that everything we do is really made out of love.
And it shows. That's the main thing. So if you're ever up in Detroit, you should visit the GIA as well. So
yeah, you know, I've never done a convention in Detroit, but I definitely would like to. It's on my list. I think for whatever reason, it's always bumped with other stuff. I mean, for years too, for me, you know, when you work a full-time job, you sort of have to prioritize the number of days that you can get off. You know, I have a real favorable schedule right now where I can do a lot more shows, you know, but that wasn't always the case. So, and you know what I mean? Like you need a week to do San Diego Comic-Con because it starts on Wednesday and you need to really kind of get there on Tuesday to set up. So, I mean, like, you know, that's a week, you know, if you have 2 weeks vacation, that's half of your vacation. So, and then you know, try to maybe parse out your other days to do like a day here, a day there. I mean, a lot of times when I do shows, I work nights, and I've worked overnights for my whole life. You know, you leave work and you drive right to the airport. You know, so I have my stuff packed before I go to work. I leave work, I drive to the airport, I fly someplace. I do the first day of a show on no sleep to turn my schedule 24 hours. And then, you know, after the first day, I usually pass out. And then, you know, and then I'm kind of on the day side schedule. And then I do the show for 3 days. And then, you know, a lot of times I will, you know, fly out Monday and go right from the airport to work and like change in a closet somewhere or something, you know? So it's not the life for everybody. I can assure you of that, but it's definitely 100% the life for me. It's, you know, in some ways it's the only way it works to be able to do things the way I do them. It's the only way it was ever going to work. And I think to a certain extent, it made me stronger because, you know, like sometimes the universe, I think, kind of knows what you need better than you know. Like in 2008, if somebody had picked up Headlocked and put it in comic stores, it probably would have been in for, you know, whatever, 10, 15 issues and then just be done, like every other comic book series. Sort of the initial rejection I got from the direct market, I think, helped me build a stronger, more sustainable brand. And, you know, now we've been at it for 10 years. So 10 plus years, you know, it worked out.
All right, let me ask my last 4 questions. I know we're short on time here, so I do appreciate you coming on the show, Mike. It's been a true pleasure having you on. It's really eye-opening to see hard work does truly pay off when it comes to comics and, of course, you know, yourself as a creative person. Well, I mean, it's true.
No, I know. I appreciate that. You know, sometimes it's hard sometimes to take compliments, I guess.
Everyone has 1 or 2 people that inspire them on their path to where they are today. Who was that for you?
Whew. Man, there's so many people. You know, I had mentioned a little bit before about, you know, Jerry and his exploits and how much I had respected him before. You know, same with Hurricane as a guy who was sort of between comics and wrestling. Yeah, I guess more than anybody else, you know, would be my mother. My mom was a type of person that she was you know, like a secretary, administrative assistant type for most of her life, but she never stood for disrespect. She always worked hard. Everything that had her name on it was done right. And, you know, sometimes that wasn't always appreciated, you know, having respect for yourself in a lower tier position, I guess. But it's one of the things that I've always carried with me. And she worked 2 jobs for a good chunk of her life to make sure that I had opportunities. So, you know, her work ethic and her sort of the pride that she took in her work and how hard she worked definitely rubbed off on me. And I think it's definitely something I've carried with me to this day. unfortunately, she passed probably right after 2008. It was right after our first book had come out. So she did get to see, she got to see our first book and stuff. And I obviously wish she could have seen, what we've become. And I'm sure she does on some level. And then one of the sort of interesting trivia notes, I guess, is that, my mom, her birthday was on, it was on November 29th. And that's also the same day that Jerry Lawler's birthday is. And he sort of came into my life when she went out of my life. And, Jerry's always been so good to me in a way that, I don't know, people wouldn't probably expect, but he's such a good and generous dude. And, so it's been really, it's interesting to have have a weird guardian angels like that, I guess.
That can also, pile drive something.
Yeah, no doubt, right?
From a professional standpoint, you are now on your 6th Kickstarter campaign. You have created many books. You've worked with so many talented individuals in wrestling, and you continue to produce amazing content when it comes to these great comic books. Do you consider yourself personally successful?
Yeah, I do. Because I did the thing I wanted to do that everybody told me I couldn't do. And I've done it on my terms. I don't feel like I've had to, I don't think I've had to compromise my integrity, and I feel like overall I've done more good for the industry, I guess, than any kind of harm. I think one of the things that I try to do, these breaking into comics panels and stuff, where I try to get people to understand, some of the realities about getting into comics and paths that they can take that aren't necessarily readily available or readily understood. Like I told you before about my, trying to have a place for wrestling fans at cons and stuff. I mean, I feel like I've been able to do good things for people. I try to help everybody stand on my shoulders so they don't make the mistakes that I made at the beginning. So if nothing else, I see a ton of people that are sort of beholden to the industry and can't speak up about things that they want to speak up about because of the way the industry is, and people that, like one person that runs afoul of you can ruin your life creatively. I don't have any of that stuff. I did the thing that I wanted to do on my terms, and I feel like I've helped people along the way. And if it all ended tomorrow, I got to do some crazy stuff. I was a guest at WrestleMania in a luxury box one year. I've been backstage at Raw. I was backstage at SummerSlam the year Stephen Amell was there. Got to hang out with famous people and have them sort of talk to me like I'm a normal person, I guess. You know what I mean? Like they deal with you on a different level, not like a fan, but like an equal, I guess. So that stuff is really cool. I mean, I wouldn't change anything, even if, obviously I'd like to get a little further along in what I do. Ultimately, I feel like I did the thing that I wanted to do, and I don't want to go all Sinatra on you here, but
You did it your way. The reverse of success is failure. How do you deal with your failures?
I'll tell you a funny story. So, when I started, I think I mentioned some of the difficulties I had, and I had mentioned before that, I did Wizard Philly, and it was great, and I had done Wizard Chicago, and it did great. Well, my third show was the Fan Expo in Toronto. Oh, yeah. And in my mind, I've done these 2 shows and they're fantastic. And so now I want my wife to see, how good we're doing, because she was skeptical. And I understand anybody's skepticism for diving into this world. We booked a hotel and more money than I'd spent on a show before, because I'd crashed with friends in Chicago and in Philly, and, kind of done everything, on the cheap. The way the show was structured, I had an Artist Alley table, and they had sort of structured themselves as they, initially they were five conventions in one. So it was horror, anime, gaming, sci-fi, and comics. So the main section of exhibitors was set up like that, but Artist Alley was just whatever. Like the horror section leads into Artist Alley. And on the back end, on the end caps, there was a freak show that had a very aggressive carnival barker. And then on the other side, there were satanic priests. Basically, it created this thing where people were just going around. Like nobody was walking through our aisle because they were trying to avoid the carnival barker dude and the priests and whatever. So now I'm not selling, and it's just like, oh no, I promise, we were doing good at these other shows, so we're not selling a lot of books. And that part of it's frustrating. And like people just aren't coming down the aisle. And then the second night we went to dinner and I got sick at dinner. And then I left my shoulder bag there, which had my cash box in it. So then my cash box was broken into and all of my money was taken. The next day, as I went to leave the show, I had my long box set up on a handcart and I was going up an escalator and the top of the box broke and all my books went down the escalator. It was a packed escalator, and people obviously couldn't stop because it's an escalator. 50 people walked across all of my books. I mean, it was a failure on every conceivable level. Like my product was damaged. I lost all my money. And I failed in front of the one person that I did not want to fail in front of. That was as deep of a failure as you could get. And it's right at the beginning when you're not necessarily sure of yourself. I mean, it was tough. I mean, I almost quit right there. But I sort of made a commitment to myself that, when I do shows now, I was going to give myself an experience that is independent of the convention. Whether it's going to find some really cool food or going to see some sort of landmark or visiting old friends that are in town, I was going to make sure that I didn't come away empty-handed no matter what. That even if I lost some money, I'm going to be like, wow, but I still had this amazing sandwich, or I saw this museum, or, I saw this person that I haven't seen in 15 years. That's how I try to balance it out. Like I try not to put all of my eggs in one basket just in case I have another show like Toronto Fan Expo. So I didn't go back for years. And then finally, I think it was 2013, I went back and sort of exercised the demon. I had a good show and it was good. And I felt like I got that out of my system. And now I feel like I could, include it in my rotation. It's just always tricky because it's Labor Day weekend and I work my real life jobs or whatever is I work in warehousing and logistics, and it's always a busy time of the year. So, I would do Florida SuperCon on 4th of July. So I'd never be able to take both summer holidays off. So it was always a tricky thing to do. But yeah, so that's how I try to deal with failure.
The younger generation is looking at your work and they're becoming inspired to be creative in their own way, whether maybe they want to become wrestlers or maybe they want to become comic creators or writers or whatever they'd like to do creatively. How can they inspire the generation that follows them?
I think just above all, it's the most trite thing in the world, but this is what I tell people. It's how I end all my my breaking into comics panels and stuff. But you know what I mean? Like you just got to do it. You got to put aside the voice in your head that tells you that you can't do it. And you just got to do it. Like people come up to me all the time. Like, oh, I had an idea for a comic book that was just like The Walking Dead or whatever. And listen, Walking Dead's great. I got all the trades. It's not Shakespeare. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like it's within somebody's capability to make something that cool. Like it's anybody can do anything. Like I'm a biochemistry major that played college football, that works in trucking, that taught myself to write and made my own comic books. You set your own limits, I guess, as a human. Like the minute you say that you can't do something is the minute that you can't do it. And it's just a matter of you just got to do it. You can't wait for the time to be right. Like you can't wait for everything to align properly in the stars or whatever. Like you just have to sit down and put one foot in the other, one foot in front of the other and start doing it. And I think when you do things, when you make things happen, other people see that they can do that thing too. Because I'm not special. I'm not any different. I don't have any gifts that anybody else doesn't have the ability to have. I think a lot of times we talk about people that are self-made or whatever, but like we're all beneficiaries from people, you curate your life, you surround yourself with good people, and you just do your best to keep moving forward. Is, as much as that sounds like the theme of Rocky 5 or whatever, it's the truest thing in the world. Like, you just got to do it, because if you don't, someone else will. And I think if you do something with love in your heart, no matter how much it's accepted. I mean, if it doesn't find a giant audience or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, you're going to touch some people. People are going to read your thing. They're going to see your thing. They're going to watch your match or whatever, and you're going to affect somebody. You're going to touch somebody. I remember talking to Dolph Ziggler at he was my guest at San Diego one year, and he had just had a cage match with Kofi Kingston where like Kofi dove out the door to win the match. And when I was a kid, like, one of the most enduring memories I have is of Tito Santana and Greg Valentine in a cage match. And Tito Santana kicked the door shut on Greg Valentine's face and won the match. And like, that stuck with me forever. And I was saying that to Dolph. I was like, how, you know what I mean? Like, there's kids watching that show, watching SmackDown right now. You know what I mean? To some people, to people who've been watching wrestling for 20 years, like, you know what I mean? It's another match, but to some kid, that's his, one of his first matches. And that's one of the most amazing things he's ever seen. And that's going to go on to inspire him. So, you know what I mean? Like, you just gotta do the work. You do the work with love in your heart, and try not to step on other people. And I think, things will happen. And even if you're not, you know what I mean? Even if you're not Leonardo DiCaprio or whatever, not, inspiring people like, whatever, the president or whatever, you're going to touch somebody's life, and you're going to spark somebody. And I've had enough people come up and tell me that they've been inspired by my story and what I've done, that, you know what I mean? Like, that's the kind of stuff that, that's the kind of stuff that feeds your soul when it's, when I'm, haven't slept for 20 hours and I'm driving to a show, and I've got, flying home from a show and trying to, have to pull a 14-hour shift at work. You know what I mean? Like, those are the things that make it all worth it, that, keep you going when the gas tank is empty.
Well, I do hate to say this, Mike, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I want to thank you for coming on. I do appreciate all the hard work you've done, and I want to see you keep creating some amazing stuff.
Thanks, man. It's I've been, like I said, man, I've been real lucky that a lot of real good people have, sort of taken me on and helped me out and let me stand on some people's shoulders and whatever. And it's just like I said, never in a million years did I ever think I'd be making comics with my favorite wrestlers. So it's been cool.
So before I let you go, where can we find you and how can we support you on social media? Because your Kickstarter obviously ends on November 11th, and we want to get all the support we can to help you out.
All my socials are Headlocked Comic: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. It's all me. I run everything. So if you have questions about the Kickstarter, if you have questions about breaking into comics, if you just want to, talk about wrestling or some nonsense, whatever, I'm always around. But the Kickstarter is going now. We've still got some really, we've got some amazing tiers. We've got some cool signed stuff. I've got prints that are signed by The Undertaker and Sting. We've got stuff signed by Becky Lynch, just cool comic book art. We've got variant covers. We've got a variant cover by Danhausen that's extremely popular right now. It's only available through the Kickstarter if you're down with Danhausen. I've been down with Danhausen before Danhausen was Danhausen. So I knew him before he ever put on the makeup. And like, and that's one of the things that I love to do. I get to work with a guy that's making it, that I've known since the beginning. And like, Danny Limelight's doing really well. And I've known him from San Diego Comic-Con for years. And like, I love to see that stuff. But yeah, the Kickstarter's going. Don't wait till the last day, just because, it's better for my mental state to not. It's
not wait.
It's hard, man. It's hard. I've literally had it up the entire time we've been talking. Like, I have it on the it's the watched pot that never boils.
I was going to say, I saw your eyes flicking back and forth there.
It's always it's always up on my screen. Last night I had AEW and SmackDown up at the same time, and my Kickstarter in the bottom corner there. I put a picture of it up on Twitter, but I was working on a script, analog style plotting. So I had all these things going on my TV, so I could watch all the great wrestling and stare at my Kickstarters.
Well, don't go crazy with it. You have lots of time left, and you're doing really well with everything with there. But thanks again for coming on the show. I do greatly appreciate it. You can, of course, like Mike said, support him on his website. It's down in the lower third. Support the Kickstarter. I'll post it up during this interview as well too. And of course, you can find this interview and thousands of others on our website, geekstalking.com or tgtmedia.com. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell, and it's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening, watching on Two Geeks Talking. Hey, all, Kurt Sasso here from Two Geeks Talking. If you like this video and these quick clips here, make sure you take a look at our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGTmedia. Make sure you hit the likes button and subscribe as well. Hit the bell to make sure you get notifications, of course, from videos like this here. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching over the years, and keep listening and watching for new and exciting interviews with talented and creative people in the entertainment industry. I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. Thank you so much.